It's my pleasure today to be joined by Representative Charlie Shepard from District 7 in Seat B. So without any further ado, Representative Shepard, thanks for joining me. What's brought you to this point where you're serving in the legislature, and what's your goals for the next term?
So what brought me here was when I was born and raised in Idaho, and from as far back as I can remember, my dad was politically active in the Republican Party. Uh, I remember being on a float and throwing candy off when we were campaigning for Steve Sims way back in the day. And then of course Helen Chenoweth and Larry Craig. So been surrounded by politics, whether I wanted to be or not, for most of my life. Graduated here in Salmon River, in Riggins at Salmon River High School in '86. Went on to work in the woods for 15 years logging. Then me and my dad and my brother started a small log home building business. And the same time I was in the private sector working there, I started coaching and kind of made a name for myself in the high school coaching ranks. Got married to my wife of 30 years, had 4 kids. Now I have 4 grandkids. And the first 16 years of my coaching career, my dad was in the legislature. And when he decided that he'd had enough, he told me I should throw my name in the hat. And before that, I really hadn't even considered it, but timing was right. And 4 years ago, I threw my name in and was elected, and been serving in the Idaho State House for 4 years now. Like I say, just a born, bred Idaho Christian family man is pretty much the values that I stand behind. And the being a head coach, I'm not very good at following instructions or following anybody for that matter. So the constituents of District 7 voted me in to lead for them down in the state house. And I'm not very interested in following any special interest group because they are not the ones that put me in office. And so I'm very reluctant to follow any special interest group, no matter what their name is. So never claimed to be a professional politician, and I will probably never be one. And so I do the best I can do, and I do what the people want me to do for the most part. And I got 4 years of voting record down there. I encourage everybody to take a look at it and make the decision for themselves if I have been towing the line or not.
Do you coach football?
I coached football and basketball.
Oh, okay.
In the 18 years as the head football coach, I won 5 state titles.
Wow.
And in the, I think it was 17 years or 16 years of head coach in basketball, I won 2 state titles. And then went on to have a lifetime experience when the NFL invited me and my wife down to Dallas when Leighton Vander Esch, who I coached in high school, was a prospective first-round draft pick. And we got to go down and spend 2 nights down there in Dallas and watch him be drafted number 19. And that was pretty special. I recommend that to every high school coach.
That sounds pretty neat. That's somebody you coached at one point, then was able to achieve that. It's to be a part of that.
Being the starting middle linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys and coming from small town Idaho, that in itself is quite a story. But he had huge success, and I'm just extremely proud of him and all of his teammates that played a part in, and the whole community of Salmon River that helped him get his start to go on to Boise State and be the Mountain West defensive player of the year. And then of course, to go on to play for Dallas.
Looking at, coaching and then being in the legislature, do you see any, eh, I don't know, any comparisons or anything you can draw from your coaching career? You're out there, you're, leading, you're raising people up, helping them to be better, drawing up plays, coming in with a game plan to win. Is there anything that you can take from there to working in the legislature, working with, your fellow representatives, trying to get a bill across the finish line, or stop a bad bill?
Absolutely. And you kind of touched on what I would consider one of the most difficult things down at the State House right now is if you're going to be a successful team, I don't care if it's high school football, basketball, or team called the Republican Party, you have got to work together. You can't have entities inside your team working kind of in their own corner, making their own game plan that doesn't fit the game plan overall. And if we are going to be successful in stopping what I would call the liberal influence that's coming into the state as people move in from California and Washington, we've got to come together as a team and we've got to all be on the same page. And that's one of the biggest reasons I'm a little bit reluctant to join any other caucus. Just to put it bluntly, I'm not interested in joining the Freedom Caucus because I was elected and ran as a Republican. I want to be just part of the Republican caucus. And right now there's 3 caucuses down there at the State House. You have the mainstream caucus that is more Eastern Idaho freshman type. Then you have the Freedom Caucus, which politically I'm aligned with them really close, but still that's just creating division that I don't think is productive by having a separate caucus. And I would just assume that we would just have the Republican caucus because we already have to fight the Democrat caucus, but right now they don't have a lot of power or influence in the legislature, but those days are coming. And if we can't come together as a party and work together, they will take over just because we're going to self-destruct.
How do we come together in unity without compromising on, really important principles?
I don't think you should ever compromise principles, right? And you can work together, you can agree to disagree, and you can get to an end result without compromising principles. Sometimes you're going to have disagreements that you can't come to an agreement on, but you don't get there by working apart. You don't get there by working in separate little bodies. You need to have conversations with everybody so that you can slowly make the one side understand where the other side is coming from. And the only way you do that is having a working relationship with all of your fellow Republicans and not having animosity and not disparaging comments. You just have to treat everybody with respect, regardless of your political stand. And I personally, I will not ever compromise my principles, but that doesn't mean that I won't try to work with people that oppose those principles and try to sway them to what I call the right side.
Shifting gears a little bit, I've got your district map up on the other screen here, and well, District 7 is big geographically. So I guess my first question is, how do you connect with the voters, constituents, the families in such a large district?
It's very difficult, and that's probably the number one criticism of people that in my district is they're a little upset with me because I don't return as many emails as they would like, and they look at that as not representing them. What people have to understand is I represent close somewhere around 56,000 people. It's a 3 hour drive one way from one end of my district to the other if you're driving too fast, and which I normally do. But um, it's almost impossible to do your job as a legislator, read all of those emails, because you need to read the emails to get the information. And and then you have people that send multiple emails to return every one of them emails and do your job. And like myself, I'm a working representative. I'm not I'm not a professional politician. I have a job that I have to do, and I have a family. You combine all that, and there's just not enough hours of the day. And the only way that I could do it is if I just totally dedicated all my energy to, essentially, the second I'm reelected, start working to get reelected by returning every email. And that's just not what I ran for office for. I ran to go down there and stop bad legislation, push good legislation, and work with my fellow legislators to convince them of one or the other. And if I spent all my time answering every emails, I would never have time to do the actual job that I was hired to do.
That brings me to something I've asked others, and I've just mulled on it myself. We have a part-time legislature. It's paid like a part-time legislature, for 3 months of the year. No staff. You might have a few volunteers who can help you with emails if you're lucky. Uh, and I think, a downside of that is that it puts you at a disadvantage because, like I said, it's, a full-time job just to keep up with email and, communicating with constituents. But then you also have the executive branch comes in with their full-time staff, and they're trying to convince you all to do one thing or another. Uh, you have to decide on hundreds and hundreds of bills every session, and it's impossible to read every single one unless you stay up 24/7. So I'm wondering if there is a case to be made to, maybe not go full time, but raise the pay a bit so that people who have jobs and don't have the ability to take off 3 months at a time can run for office. That you can maybe hire a staffer to help you with your email, help keep up on things. But then I'm really very leery about going toward a full time legislature because that takes us to that full time career politician place that we don't really want to go. So is there a way to make that work better?
I do, and I mean, yes, I think there is. Just take, for instance, the difference between the Senate, the state Senate, and the state House. Every senator, every three or four, have a pool secretary that's right there to assist them, because there's only 35 of them. Just that little bit of help, that little bit of assistance enables them to get back to more of their constituents, get their message out, to people back home. So if we would just invest just a little bit more into staffing for the House members, so they have that little bit of help, I think it would make a huge difference. And again, there's a fine line between a professional legislator and a true representative legislature. And in order to enable the House to have more time and more ability to talk to the people back home, we need to invest a little bit more into their infrastructure down there to make that possible.
Another thing I noticed looking at the map of District 7 over here is 80-90% of it looks like it's federal land. Um, I saw in another interview you did, you mentioned that one of the things you'd like to see done is more using of the timber on BLM lands. Obviously, coming from a logging background, that's something about. So at a lower level, what should be done with some of that federal land? At a higher level, how do we adjudicate the relationship with the federal government because they control so much of our land, especially in North Idaho?
Well, I can't really speak for the higher level. I mean, I know what I would do if I was a state, a US congressman or a US senator. I would be on them relentlessly. But at our level, there is that program, the Good Neighbor Authority, which is a partnership between the federal government, the Forest Service, and the BLM with the Idaho Department of Lands, who is in charge of logging and harvesting timber on our state lands. Well, what that new Good Neighbor Authority does is it allows the state to go on federal land and cut and harvest that timber and put it into the system, which any timber taken off federal land is a boost to the Idaho economy through uh, jobs, more taxes, more income from taxes. So all of that is a boost to our economy. And it's a very small investment for the state for the tremendous return we get. And I think this last year we passed a bill that added 3 more positions on the Department of Lands to the Good Neighbor Authority and the funding to pay those 3 positions. The ironic part about this is I get criticism saying that I'm raising government or increasing the size of government and increasing the budget by doing such things. But anybody that knows anything about business knows when your business is growing, you have to hire more employees and your overall budget grows. But in return, we're getting tenfold back what we're investing. And so is the cup half empty or is the cup half full? It just depends on if you want to be a critic or if you want to be on the positive side. I will continue to do everything I can, if reelected, to capitalize on that new policy and get as much federal timber into the system as possible. And that includes the mining. We need the critical minerals for all aspects of our nation, and it's just sitting there idle on our federal lands, and we've got to tap into that resource.
That's looking back. I saw there used to be some serious debates about how to reclaim the federal lands, but they seem to have died down now. But I don't know. It seems like a good idea to try and utilize them as much as possible for the benefit of Idaho.
If I thought that we could take over the state could take over the federal lands and use it for multiple, I would vote for that in a heartbeat, because the state would manage the federal lands at a high profit, whereas the federal government they're essentially going broke with a huge asset given to them. And that's just because of total mismanagement. Our state lands have proved, our Idaho Department of Lands have proved that we can operate and have multiple use, sustainable use at a profit. So to me, there's no argument. The state does so much better at managing the public lands than the federal government does.
What are some of the other unique challenges of District 7? And what are you hearing from people as for their personal challenges?
Well, the number one issue, especially in Idaho and Nez Perce County, is property taxes. And it's really hard at the state level to have much of an impact. And that's why I'm really pleased over the last couple of years, the state has actually stepped in and reimbursed property taxpayers directly. We've given property tax relief from the state level. But I've watched the whole time my dad was in office, and there just never seemed to be a reasonable fix to the problem. Well, then I go down to Boise and I see the massive growth by these huge companies, like the Amazon buildings going up out there in Nampa. You've got the Costco's going up all over. You've got Walmart's. You've got these massive companies that pay their executives multi-millions of dollars, and they're creating sales tax receipts through all the business they're doing. And the state has this continues to have a surplus of income. So it makes no sense to me for us not to utilize, especially the sales tax part of that, to help pay for public education and take the burden away from our local property taxpayers that are paying it first straight up right off the, just with their general property taxes, but then compounded with having to pay for the school levies. The school district that I live at here in Salmon River, we have had to run a school levy every year that I've been a part of the program. And there's just no getting around that until we figure out how the state can put more money into the system. In the last few years, we have upped, the income from the state quite a bit, record funding for public education. And my motivation for that is more to solve the property taxpayer fitting the bird than it is for really any other reason. There's a lot of other reasons that I think it's pertinent to do that. But my number one reason is we've got to figure out a way to spread that tax that funds the schools out to everybody, not just the property taxpayer. That is an unfair tax to make them fit the bill for everything.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing from people all across the state, that property taxes are one of, if not the most important issue for people. And ironically, like you said, it's local governments that are imposing property taxes to support themselves. And the state has to get really creative to figure out ways to mitigate that.
I've been on the property tax committee for 3 years now, and I'm learning every day. I'm learning more and more about how the system works, and you almost have to be a tax lawyer to know everything. But I'm starting to figure some stuff out, and I'm keeping it to myself right now. But I've got an interesting, I'll put it that way, an interesting solution that is gonna maybe cause a little stir with some of the government officials, but that's okay. That's what we're supposed to do is fire them up. And I like working with everybody as much as I can, but once in a while you just have to, step on some toes and make some noise. And that's kind of what I did with Idaho Power, trying to get them to let a little bit more of the water out of Hells Canyon Dam during the day. So our Idaho outfitters can use it in Hells Canyon. And boy, you talk about poking the bear. They came back with claws bared, and they're still upset. They're still mad at me. But once in a while, the little guy's got to stand up for the little guy, and you gotta poke the bear a little bit. So I have nothing against Idaho Power. I think they do a great job. I think they do a great service for the citizens of Idaho. But just like every business and just like every person, every legislator, we're not perfect, and there's things we can improve on.
So shifting a little bit over to schools, you obviously have a unique perspective here. You're literally in a school as we speak. There's on the one hand, there's what do we do with public schools? More money, more changing the way they're funded, changing the way of oversight. But then on the other side, there's the push for school choice, or I guess we already have school choice in that parents can send their children where they want, but having tax money follow the child. Last year there was a education savings account bill that died in the Senate, and this year on the Revenue and Tax Committee, which you're on, there was a tax credit bill for private school tuition and other alternative schooling, and that failed there. What do you think should be done in those arenas, and how do you get what you want through the legislature?
Well, first and foremost, just like, I took an oath that we're going to uphold the Constitution, and that means the state of Idaho's Constitution as well as the US Constitution. And there's some people out there that that is very important to them, that you do that right up until the part where it says we have to fund public education. Well, not only do I support public education because of the Constitution obligation, but secondly, because again, it's a good way to get pressure off the property taxpayer. That being said, the first thing we've done the last 3 years is cut taxes across the board, lowered income tax. Then we gave property tax relief. Then we raised the public education funding, just like we did this year with, essentially the $1 billion in 10 years plan. So all that being done and said, we had the tax credit for school choice come to our committee. And it's my opinion that if we have funded education, public education, first and foremost, and there's money left over, that I see nothing wrong with giving parents the choice to use a little bit of their own money, because it's a tax credit. It is not a school voucher. It's just a credit. I was in favor of that bill and actually voted in favor of, I can't remember exactly if the motion was to hold in committee, and I voted against the motion to hold in committee, I think is the way it went down. But I essentially voted in favor of that bill, because I believe once all those other obligations are fulfilled and there's money left over, I see no reason for us not to give parents another choice, especially I think the problem with the individual bills, the way it was written, is it needs more sideboards on it to make sure that we're helping out the lower income families. That if you want to send your kid to a private school and you've got plenty of money to do it, I'm not sure that you need the tax break. But again, I hate to punish people that have worked hard their whole life and made successful, and then not give them the same benefits as everybody else. But in the reality, for a bill like that to get passed, it's going to probably have to have a few more sideboards. But I've proven with my vote that after we have funded public education, first and foremost, I am in favor of school choice.
You mentioned sideboards, and that's one thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about, accountability. Shifting that over a little bit, there was a proposal in the, I think it was in Health and Welfare Committee, to put sideboards on Medicaid expansion. And that one, a lot of people signed up to testify against it because they were worried that those sideboards would cause the program to go away if they weren't met, or if they would take away their personal benefits. And it brings to my mind a question about the greater role of government. You mentioned how the Constitution, says that the legislature needs to provide for the free public school system. That was written in the kind of a progressive era when people thought, okay, what can government do for you? How can it, help society? And now I think there's more of a sense of, okay, government's gotten too big. How do we roll it back? But by now it's, got its fingers in everything. So how first of all, where do we draw the line, and what is the role of government? And then if it needs to be rolled back, how do we do that without either, shooting ourselves in the foot politically, or, leaving people hung out to dry who have become dependent on it?
And that you hit it right on the nail. I mean, the nail right on the head. You're gonna have to show some political backbone to stand up and say, this is not the proper role of government. We have to, like you said, roll it back. And if we don't find some sideboards in that health and welfare department, it's going to break the whole state. You think we don't have enough money right now for public education? You wait until we have to keep funding the runaway train that is our health and welfare department. We have to show some backbone as political figures, and we have to start making some tough cuts while we still have the funding to do whatever we want to do and can do. Because just like in 2008 and 2009, the time's coming where we're not going to have any choice. We have to have a balanced budget every year, and there are some tough cuts coming. It'd be way easier to start incrementally, slowly start cutting back now when we don't absolutely have to, than if we wait until it's, a crisis situation. And I think that the fact that we came in this year with a new budgeting system, in my word, it's the biggest uh, improvement to the Idaho taxpayer for sure since the 4 years I've been down there, and probably even goes beyond that. But with this new budgeting system, we stopped the growth of government, financial growth of government. We held it to, what was it, 1.7%? I mean, when you're talking about $5 billion, that's a lot of money. But if we can slowly keep pinching that down to where there is no growth in budget, that's kind of my goal. And then we start the actual cuts. Where those cuts need to be, we're going to have to just take it, individual department at a time, and find out if this is the proper role of government, and can the private sector do it better than government. And I have way more faith in the private sector than I do in government. But there is some part of government that is a necessary evil, transportation, education. Those are some things that, if we could take the federal government clear out of that with the strings that they attached, would be great, but it's just not financially feasible right now. And every working citizen in the state of Idaho pays federal income tax. So we have a certain amount of that tax that needs to come back to us that we're owed. But when they try to send us federal money for things that I don't think are the proper role of government, with terrible strings attached to it, that's when we say, no, you keep your federal money. We don't want no part of it.
But that's a hard thing to say no to, what a lot of people consider to be free money.
Yeah, and that's the part that is I can't wrap my head around people thinking that's free money when it I don't know. Somebody's going to pay for that someday, and it might be us here shortly when everything crashes, if everything crashes, I should say. But there isn't anything free in this world, and I got news for you. You're going to pay for it one way or another, either for the harm that it does because the strings attached to your children, or outright your taxes going up. None of it's free.
Yeah, it's with the federal government almost $35 trillion in debt. I know people have been saying that it's going to crash, my entire life. But it will eventually. Something has to be done about it. It can't continue indefinitely. And then, we're left with what, 45% of our budget coming from the federal government. What do we do if that ever dries up?
And the statement was made by an individual saying that we really don't have a balanced budget. I'll speak for myself. I don't know that I can control the federal budget as far as balancing it or not. What I can control is the state budget, and the state money, the money that it comes in through tax receipts versus the spending that we do with that. We have balanced the budget, and we've done it with tax cuts. And I still am not used to the fact that they call a tax cut a spending. You're spending our money giving a tax cut. No, I don't see it that way. It was the taxpayers' money to start with. We're just giving it back to them because we don't need it. But anyway, that's my own personal. But we have done a good job, in my opinion, whatever that's worth, of balancing our budget and trying to give money back to the taxpayer, because we've done it every year I've been in office. Have we give enough back? Well, it's just like public education. They say it's never enough. So just like tax cut, it's never enough, but at least we're trying.
I've heard, as I've been having these conversations with different people, that two different philosophies on how to control spending. One of them is, be more strict in JFAC with where you're cutting things, but the other is to starve the beast essentially by cutting taxes, and then that reduces the amount of money that's available to play with, so to speak, which can also reduce spending. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're getting so used to having so many tax cuts that we forget that they can be effective in both giving money back to taxpayers and reducing spending.
Well, there's been a little bit of, I don't know if you call it misinformation, but there's been some people saying that over the past few years, our budget has just exploded. Like, like we just have a runaway train of government spending. When the reality is the state has grown. Our our budget has grown because there's more people in the state utilizing the same at the same rate our spending has grown, our income has grown because of all the new businesses moving in. So it's not quite accurate saying that our spending has exploded because it's a negative. Our spending has exploded because that's the reality of, just like I say, when a business grows, the income grows, the expenses grows. So when our population in the state in the last 4 years has grown dramatically, which brings in more tax dollars through their spending, which brings in more expenses through their use of the roads, their more kids in school. So it it's hand in hand that if your budget grows because you have more people coming in, that your expenses are going to grow. So if again, is the cup half empty or half full? The first year I was there, the overall state budget that we had to work with was just under $3 billion, if I remember right. Now it's 5.2 billion, I think, and growing. I mean, that's just in a 4-year span. So um, uh, I'm very, very concerned about the growth of government always. But just because our spending has got, our overall spending budget has grown, doesn't necessarily mean we're being less fiscally responsible. It just means our state's growing.
Well, I guess it depends, like we were talking about what's the role of government? Because when we talk about, streets, roads, that's, obviously something that it seems to me to be wise to invest in. You build the roads now so that you don't have awful traffic problems 10 years down the way. But then you have, Department of Health and Welfare has almost a $5 billion budget just by itself, and a lot of that's Medicaid. Uh, so it's not just that, government spending is all the same thing everywhere. It's, sometimes it's wise, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's within the role of government, sometimes it's not, and it's, you know, we need people in the state house to be able to make those judgments.
And like you said earlier, you're going to upset some people when you start cutting budgets and when you voted. And again, if people look at my voting record, you'll see that there is a lot of budgets that I vote against because, one, I don't think it's the proper role of government. For instance, that's one reason. Another reason is they already have enough money. We don't need to be giving them more money to expand their agencies. And some of them are spending the money inappropriately. And as long as they're spending the money in a, I just keep it that to that word, inappropriate way, I'm not gonna vote to fund them. So, but then on the other hand, there's a lot of agencies that I consider the proper role of government, and they're doing a adequate job, and so I don't feel that bad about funding them, especially if they are gonna grow the income of the state by keeping people, businesses, um, private business working and bringing in tax money.
Well, I've appreciated your time, and thank you for making the time to come talk to me. I know you've got to go in just a few minutes. Is there any other topics that you want to make sure that you mention before we go, and also just your closing thoughts?
No, I think we've done a pretty good job covering the critical stuff. I just hope people understand that, I've lived here my whole life. I didn't escape essentially another state because of the political preferences in that state to come to Idaho. I've lived in Idaho my whole life, and I take a little bit of offense when people come from other states to get away from that state's politics. And then the first thing they do when they get here is they start criticizing Idaho and essentially want to fix it. If Idaho is so bad, why did you come here? And two, take a look at what Idaho has done the last couple of years, getting out in front of some of these woke policies that coming from the other state. And you'll see that we're not sitting on our hands, that we are proactive, and we've made sure to protect the freedoms that made Idaho the place that these people wanted to move to. And I again, being an Idahoan my whole life, I appreciate the freedoms that Idaho has, and I plan on protecting them at all costs. And, you know, the Second Amendment rights in the state are some of the best, strongest laws that we have in the nation. I personally utilize my Second Amendment right every day at work and at play. So I just, again, I'm honored to be able to represent District 7. And I think that if people will do their homework, they'll see that my record stands on its own, regardless of what any score you want to go and look at. I hope people don't look at scores and think that that's a complete or I don't know. If I start talking about scores, I start getting angry. So I won't talk about scores, but just look at my voting record. It's there. It's for everybody to see. And you'll see that I support Idaho in every way, shape, or form. And there's just like being in a marriage, you're not going to agree with every decision made that you're with your wife, but you don't just run out and get divorced the first time you disagree. So I hope they don't want to divorce me as their legislator just because one or two issues that we don't agree on. So, but anyway, I'm not a very good politician. I'm not a smooth talker, so I'll leave that up to you.
Representative Charlie Shepard, House of Representatives, District 7, Seat B. Thank you.
Thank you.